Hello and welcome to today's EuroSTAR webinar, Many Years of Managing Testing with Johanna Rothman. So before I hand you over to Johanna today, I just want to bring a few things to your attention. So for our Q&A session, we will have this at the end, and you can ask Johanna any question by typing it into the control panel on the right, as you can see in the current slide. And the webinar will also be recorded, and we will email this to you once it's available. So for slides, we'll also email you the slides and they'll be up on the EuroSTAR blog, hopefully by the end of the week. So on Twitter then you can also follow Johanna at Johanna Rothman, and please make sure you use the hashtag ESConf when tweeting about the webinar so we can answer any questions you have. So before I hand you over to Johanna, we just want to start with a quick poll. So I'll just launch this for you now, Johanna. Now, so if you just take the time to vote, and then we can show the results, and then we'll let Johanna take over. Okay, I'll just give everybody time to vote. We're nearly there now. Okay, so that's almost everybody. Now, Johanna, you can see the results there.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, this is really helpful. Thank you so much, Miriam, because now when I talk to people, when I talk to you, I know who I'm talking to. This is excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
So I can take over?
You can. I'll hand you over right now.
Okay. All right. So we practiced this. Have I got it, Miriam? Did I do it right? Are people seeing my slides?
If you just press...
Okay. Excellent.
Good woman. Great.
Okay, so you all answered this poll, and the answer is that 58% of you are a manager or a lead, 40% of you are a tester of some variety, and 3% of you are someone else. And at some point, the 3% of you should email me and say who you are, because I could not think of what the others might be, but I thought, well,
Johanna?
I should allow for that possibility.
Johanna, can I just interrupt there? We don't actually see your slides yet. So do you want to just...
Oh,
no. That's okay.
Okay.
So
what have I not done?
Do you see the little box that would have popped up asking you to show your slides?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So, great. We can see them now.
Okay. Great. Here, how's this?
That's perfect, Johanna. Thank you.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, now we're all in sync. Oh, for heaven's sake. All right, let me take a sip of water. All right, for those of you who are munching at your desk eating lunch, it's 7:30 in the morning here. I have not yet had breakfast. I'm still drinking my tea and drinking water. So I'm awake, but it's not. The caffeine from my tea has not yet hit. So that's part of the problem. All right, so for those of you who are, quote, just, end of quote, testers, you know that you actually manage a lot of the testing process, right? Because you're interacting with developers. If you're agile, you're part of the team. You're an integral part of the team. For those of you who are managers and leads, you are working across the organization. You take a lot of responsibility. So the testers in the organization actually have a lot of responsibility. And what's really important to understand is that what you probably understand in your bones is that software testing has nothing to do with product quality. And you guys are looking at me saying, okay, Johanna has officially lost her mind. But software testing has everything to do with the information about the product under test, right? So if you think about your responsibility as saying, how do I provide information about the product under test? I transition from being a judge of the product to being an information gatherer and disseminator. And that's where I shine. I shine when I say, here is information about the product. I uncover information about the product. I do not judge the product. And that's where I provide value as a tester and as a manager. And those 3% of you who are other, well, you'll have to email me and we'll have a little discussion a little bit later. So think about, how do I provide information about the product under test or the system under test? I tend to use product, not system. And then how do I transition the other people around me from thinking that I must judge the product to thinking that I am a colleague in explaining, here's how I present information about the system under test. Okay? Not judging, but information gathering and dissemination. That's the value that I provide as a tester or a test manager. So the more information I provide, that means that I have to have more testing approaches. Now, this means that the more complex the problem and the more complex the system, the more diversity you need in testing. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that means that I want to think about, how do I provide end-to-end system testing? Especially if you are on a really huge complex system and the whole project team has maybe divided up into the front end and the middleware and the back end. How do I provide end-to-end system testing? This is not a trivial problem. I've worked in organizations where the front-end people didn't always talk to the back-end people. And if you are not agile yet and you have front-end, middleware, and back-end, how do you provide end-to-end system testing? And if you're transitioning to agile and you don't yet know, how do you integrate those teams? How do you do end-to-end system testing? If you have a lot of platforms, how do you provide combinatorial testing? Because you're not going to test every single combination. You can't possibly do that. But how do you decide which combinations you do and when do you do them? On every single build? Oh my goodness, no, you cannot do that. So how do you decide on the combinations? How do you do them? When do you decide which features are risky, and when do you retest them? So when do you do feature-based testing? Now, when do you test which areas of the system to get developer feedback? And you go on and on and on and on. So the more information you have to gather, the more testing approaches you need. And some of these will be automated, and some of these will be exploratory. And you have to use your judgment to say which ones are which. I am a huge fan of saying, if I have to test it more than once, I want to make it automated. Because the risk of me making a mistake in my testing is very high, right? I'm going to make a mistake if I have to test it more than once, and I have to do it manually. Because that's me. I make mistakes in my testing. And I don't want to have to write a script because I'm a developer by training. I'm just not going to do that. So I am not you. You are a different person. And the more agile we are, in our projects, the more I want to automate because I cannot possibly keep up with the pace of development. So I want to think about the more testing approaches I need and how quickly can I automate which things so I don't have to do it again and make a mistake. So I want to think about how many testing approaches can I take and how much information can I provide in how small in how many hours, right? If I can provide more information in as few hours, I am more valuable to my project team. And that's the value of testing. So when I think about providing information to the project team, I like to think about weather reports and testing dashboards because you and I have both seen traffic lights. And what happens with traffic lights? Well, we see green traffic lights, and projects stay green and green and green and green until they're not green anymore, right? And then they turn yellow, and what happens? They're not yellow anymore, and they're always red. So traffic lights don't work. I really like weather reports because weather reports give you a much finer indication of what's actually going on in the project. And you can say it's sunny, or it's cloudy with a chance of rain, or it's cloudy with a chance of rain and tornadoes. Weather reports, I think, give you a much finer grained piece of information about the project. So a weather report actually says that things happen to the project that are also beyond our control. And if we take action, we might be able to change the weather on our project. But a traffic light says, oh, it'll just turn green without us doing anything. So I happen to like the weather report model for dashboards instead of traffic lights. Again, your mileage may vary. Now, I really like this kind of test dashboard as opposed to other kinds of test dashboards, where I talk about features or areas or modules, and then the last test date, the state, and then the next planned test, where we actually talk about the features and what happened and then the state of it. Now, this is pretty detailed. This is not the kind of dashboard that you're going to send up to senior management. This is for the people on the project. And then you want, at least I want, an overall status on the bottom that actually talks about where we are with everything. This is not for someone who wants to just get a happy or sad face. Because for me, project status is not a happy or sad face. If you want a happy or sad face, you need to have something more like velocity in an agile project, where you get to see features completed and features not completed, right? But you can't get that from a test dashboard. You're just not going to get that from a test dashboard. So I really like to see something like this for testing. Now, if you're not agile, this for me is the best approximation to velocity. So because this is where the velocity of the project all comes together. It would be interesting to know how many of you actually are agile in terms of really agile, where the testers and the developers are working together in the same iteration, and you don't have hardening sprints or hardening iterations after the developers are done. That would be an interesting question to ask. Next time, I'll ask you that question. Now, a lot of you are talking about defects, and if you're still talking about critical defects and urgent defects, that's okay if you talk about defects among yourselves. But if you talk about defects to anyone outside of the testing group, make sure you talk about defects holistically. When I talk about defects holistically, I mean the impact of all of the defects for all of the code. And the reason I say holistically is because the defects affect all of the developers and the entire product. Let's see if does my mouse work on this, Miriam? I don't think it does. Okay, so if you look at the red and the black lines at the bottom of this graph, you can look at the new defects found and the defects closed. A lot of times people do look at those lines. And sometimes they look at the critical defects found and the critical defects closed. But what's really important, whether you're looking at a given iteration or you're looking at the critical ones or you're looking at anything specific for a point in time or just a few weeks in time, you want to look at the entire number of defects for a given release. And the reason that you want to look at that is because the developers see all the defects every time they look at the code. If a developer keeps encountering defects when he or she opens up a module or a class, the developer is going to keep bouncing his or her forehead against the defects. And when the developer does that, it doesn't matter that the defect is not critical. The developer still keeps seeing the defects, and that will change his or her approach to the code. So it's really important that you keep in mind the fact that all of the defects are there. Does it matter that we don't have zero defect code? Well, maybe, maybe not, depending on the kind of product that you have. I am not saying all products need to be zero defects. I am saying that you need to look at the knee of the blue curve, because once you see that the knee of the blue curve is there, it is safer to release. Right? I'm not saying that you need to have zero defects to release, but I am saying that you need to assess where the defects are for your product, that you need to see when it's safer to release, and that you need to understand how many is good enough for your product. And until you talk about all of the open defects and understand where all of them are, you can't possibly know what good enough is. Sometimes one open defect is too many. Sometimes 10,000 is fine. But until you know where they all are, you cannot possibly know what good enough is. So never get caught on we have one showstopper, or we didn't find any new defects found this week. Right? You have to look at defects in a holistic manner before you go on and understand where you are. So it's really important to say software testers are not victims. Testers have power because testers have the information. Right? It's how you put together the information that's really key to having the power. Now, the real question is, do you have enough people to gather the information? And my question to you is, how do you know, and what's not getting done? Now, I suspect that a number of you are multitasking, and this is really for the managers. Well, I guess it's actually for all of you, because I suspect that you're context switching between several number one priorities. And if you're confusing the urgent stuff and the important stuff, you have to think about what's really important. So you have to decide who is on which project. And for that, you have to develop a project portfolio. Because if you say yes to every single project, you may not have enough people or time to do the work. And agreeing to do something on the spur of the moment might lead you to agree to something you don't know anything about. This especially happens to testers. Well, I was going to say it happens to people who are transitioning to Agile, but I think it happens to everybody. To the people who are transitioning to Agile, you get support things in the middle of the iteration or emergencies in the middle of the iteration. To people who haven't transitioned to Agile, you get emergencies without iterations. I mean, it seems like we have emergencies all the time. So you need to be able to say no, but no is a very difficult problem, especially for testers, because it seems as if testing is always at the end. Well, it's very difficult to have it come before development. So you have to be able to figure out how to say no and say it in a way that doesn't get you into trouble. So you don't want to get into political trouble, but you cannot say maybe, because the people who want to hear yes will hear yes, and the people who want to hear no will hear no, and all of those people are your senior managers. So if you're a manager, you need to develop a project portfolio, and this is a calendar view of the project portfolio where you have projects going across the top, right? These are ranked projects, and unstaffed work going on the bottom, and that big black line is what you see that separates the staffed work from the unstaffed work. Now this is the high level view, and this is, if you don't have enough testers, you need to be able to have a view looking something like this at the very high level, right? If you don't have some kind of picture like this is a calendar view. You can have any number of views. I'll show you a lower level view in a second. If you don't have a view that looks something like this, then people cannot possibly say, when can you do something? Now this is a combination view where you have it week by week, where you can see how Becky and Dawn, Brian, Ilya, Serene, and other people are working on different things. Now if you're doing 4-week iterations, you can see that that really takes up people for a long time. But you want people to be assigned to projects for as long as possible. You don't want to move people around, because if Becky is assigned to a project 1 here is for a 4-week iteration, and then she's still assigned to project 1 through July, August, and September. She doesn't learn enough about, if she's assigned to project 1 and then abruptly assigned to project 2, she doesn't learn enough about project 1 to be useful, right, if you then assign her to project 2. So the key with assigning testers to projects is you want to keep them on a project long enough for them to get domain expertise. If you assign someone to a project, and I'm talking to you test managers now, well, I guess I'm talking to everybody. If you assign a tester to a project, or you ask a tester, which project do you want to be on? And they say, project 1. And you have them work on a project, and they're only on a project for 2 or 3 months, and then you take them off that project and have them work on a different project, all of a sudden their domain expertise is gone, right? They cannot learn another project fast enough to be useful, because remember I said the more difficult a problem, the more approaches you need. So that was my second or third or fourth slide. So if you need to have a lot of different approaches to a problem, you need to have domain expertise on a problem. So you need to have a tester really live with a project team for a very long time. You need it, whether or not you're agile. Agile has nothing to do with it. Agile is just another life cycle. But the longer a tester remains on a project, the more valuable that tester is to the project, and the more domain expertise that tester will learn. So the longer, yes, it really helps for a tester to really remain on a project. So if you have a 6-month project, you want to assign a tester to that project for the entire 6 months. So what happens if you have 10 projects and 6 testers? You have to have projects in the unstaffed work category. That means you don't have enough testers. What does that mean for you managers? You have to say to your managers, we don't have enough people. That's what you have to say. You don't say we can multitask, or you have to say we can't start those projects now. Now this is a very difficult conversation. I am not minimizing that conversation. And if you try and go agile with the number of testers you have, that will make the conversation transparent. So I actually advocate that you try, because that's when the developers will say, we need our testers. And you can say, as a test manager, I have no testers to give you. This is an impediment. You need to make it an impediment on your list of impediments. But you cannot multitask your testers. This is where, if you have been providing information about the product under test, this shows your power as testers. I hope this is making sense to you. So it's really important that the project portfolio can help you explain your staffing. Because if you don't have enough people, you cannot be a victim and placate and do the project anyway. Because if you do that, you can't succeed, right? You multitask, you do a surface level job, you can't provide enough information, and you don't do a good job. This is where people come to me and say, well, what's the ratio of developers to testers? And I say, well, it depends on your project. And they say, well, we have 17 developers and half of a tester. And I say, well, I don't think that's enough. And they say, well, I'm trying to do it anyway. And if you're trying to do it anyway, that's just not going to work. And then some people have blamed the developer mentality, where they say, if we had better people, or if we had better developers, or if we had a better architecture, we wouldn't need as many testers. Well, don't blame the developers. They're doing the best job they know how, right? I mean, maybe it's not the right architecture, but don't start blaming people. And then there are the super reasonable people, where they say, well, the standard for a developer to test ratio is 1-to-1. Well, it might be 1-to-1 for some products, and it might be 4-to-1, or it might be 5-to-1. It's certainly not 17-to-1. And that's what you need to understand is what's reasonable for your products is not reasonable for other people's products. And so it's really important to say, what is reasonable for our products and systems? So let's look at our project portfolio. So what you want to do is take a look at start explaining the needs of the project, the abilities and the number of the people, and the context of the organization. And that's where I think about congruence, right? What's our project? What's our people? What's our organization? And sit down with your manager, right, and say, look, I understand what you want, right? I understand what our organization needs, and let me tell you what we can provide, and have a congruent discussion. And if you take, this is why the project portfolio is so important. So if you're agile, it actually works really well. If you're incremental, where you work feature by feature, which is why I really like the project dashboard that I have. I'm going to go backwards and probably make all of you dizzy. Sorry. So let me go backwards. See, and if you look at this testing dashboard where you work feature by feature, that's an incremental approach. Sorry. Okay, and then if you have the project portfolio with the unstaffed work. But then if you take this congruent approach and have a really honest discussion with your manager, you might find that your manager says, I understand. Now you might find that your manager says, well, I'll do it anyway. That's not a particularly congruent answer. But you have at least had the discussion. And armed with your dashboard and armed with your project portfolio, it's very hard for the reality to not set in. So at some point, the reality of the situation will catch up with your manager. And as long as you are providing information in a congruent way, it's hard for your manager to say, you are whacked. I mean, your manager might, but it's very hard for your manager not to say, okay, I see your point. But as long as you provide information about the product under test and not judgment, and as long as you provide information in a way that makes sense, right, a holistic approach to defects, a project dashboard that makes sense, and as long as you're providing lots of information in terms of many different kinds of tests, and as long as you're not spreading yourself too thin, right, that you're actually doing a lot of testing on one project at a time, then this congruent conversation is probably going to get you somewhere. So there are many other just ordinary management lessons, such as you need a lot of interpersonal skills as a manager, such as feedback and coaching. Because if you don't provide feedback and coaching for the people as a manager for the testers, your management skills are inadequate. And managers create the environment for success. You have to develop a strategy for your testing group. You need to lead the hiring. You need to build trusting relationships. You need to build training time into the work week. So there are many other management lessons that I could be talking about. But those primary testing lessons, which are make sure that you're thinking about the testing as a way to create information about the product under test, that you are not judging the product, but that you provide information about the product, and that you provide information in many, many forms, and that you don't get into the trap of only providing information in one form, that you think about all of your testing capabilities and say, how many capabilities can I use to provide information about this product under test? And how can I make sure I'm using people the right way, which is not to plug and play them, right? I don't want to take people out of a team and put them here, but to use my project portfolio so that I can assign people to projects, keep them there, have them be part of a project team so that I'm managing the project portfolio for my testing group and having people build deep domain expertise so that I can really know what's going on in the testing group and understand that software release is a business decision. It's never about how good is the product unless that is part of the software criteria, right? So the release criteria is always part of the software release decision. And unless people say that the release criteria could be about defects, it could be about performance, it could be about reliability, but the release is a business decision. It's not necessarily about how good the software is. So every time I hear people say, nobody cares how good this product is, they might, but they might care about when they release the software also. So it's really important to say, what is driving this particular release? And if you're not sure about that, you really need to be very careful about what is driving this particular release. People release software for all kinds of reasons, and sometimes the date is the most important driver for this release. So don't be surprised if your company is releasing software because it's a particular day and not because of the goodness of the software. Remember, software release is a business decision. I learned this very early on, and I thought, I'm really surprised. Our customers really like this software. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it. I would not have used that software if I had not been inside the organization, but our customers loved it. So remember that testers do not get to judge the goodness of the product. They provide information about the product. And test managers have to keep reminding the testers of that, right? It's really unfortunate that many of us have quality in our titles, because quality leads us to think that we are supposed to talk about the judgment part of it, but it's not. We are supposed to think about information, not the goodness of the product. So think about release criteria and think about what's really driving this project, I should say, and think about how do we create good release criteria that reflect the goals of this particular project. So another lesson I learned early on was that the process is not the same as testing. Think about testing and think about process and think, oh, process is something totally different than testing. Process is often written down in a book. Process is pure. Process is wonderful. Testing is often messy. Testing is something where we discover something. Testing means we're curious. Testing means is the process of discovery, and we find very interesting things. So I don't give a fig about process, but I care a lot about testing. So I want to use the testing discovery and find out all kinds of ways to break this particular piece of software or break this product or system. And how I go about it? Well, if it's not pure process, I don't really care. So I don't particularly stick to a given process. That's fine. But as long as I find a way to break this system, to break this product, I'm a very happy person. So there's all kinds of stuff I forgot to put my project management book. If you want more about release criteria, it's in Manage It, Your Guide to Modern Pragmatic Project Management. If you want to know about the project portfolio, it's in Manage Your Project Portfolio. If you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I would be happy to do so. And there's much more on my website and on my blogs. And Miriam, I think it's time for you to take this away so that you can, how do I do this?
Thank you, Joanna. I'll just change over for you now.
Okay.
Now, just one moment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Joanna, for a great presentation. Now I'll just change over and we can start with questions. So if anyone has a question now for Joanna, please type it into the control panel on the right. You can just see your questions box there. And while we're waiting for some questions, I'll just take you through the next few slides that we have. So just to let everybody know, this is our early bird deadline week. So on Friday is the deadline for saving up to €200 with our early bird offers. So if you're thinking of attending EuroSTAR 2012 in Amsterdam, it's worth taking a look at the website to see what discounts are available. Also, Joanna's webinar will be in our EuroSTAR webinar archive in the next week, and you'll also be emailed once it's available. So let me see, I think we have a question. So, okay. So Thomas Klein is just wondering, will the slides be shared? Yes, they will be. Thomas, we'll email them to you. So, okay, let's see for you, Joanna. We have a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Oana Oras. If you have multiple small projects, can you have testers multitask on multiple projects? Or how can the managers best manage that? I think that's what he's trying to say.
So I still prefer not to have testers multitask. I still prefer to have one tester on one project. The question is, how small are the projects? And one thing you might do is consider having the testers pair so that they learn from each other on possibly multiple projects, which probably sounds like it's even worse. But if they have multiple small projects and you really think you don't have enough work for one person, but you really think that it's pretty hopeless, then have two people work on several projects together so that they gain enough information on several projects so that they can support each other. Because I think that's a really useful, there's got to be a way to manage the work of several projects, and right now what they have is not working. Right, having one tester multitask on several projects is not working, I suspect, for anybody. But if they have two people supporting each other on two projects, that might work. But I suspect that that's actually not really working for you either. I would wonder about what's really going on. So maybe pair for a couple of weeks and see what's happening, and then do a little reflection and see how much time people really spent on which project.
Okay, Joanna, we have a question from Dot Graham. Have you encountered managers who think they can replace, just one sec, who think they can replace testers with automation? What do you say to them?
Oh, yes, there are always the managers who think they can replace testers with automation. Those managers are totally mistaken, because while you can replace some part of a tester with some automation, you cannot replace the deviousness of coming up with great exploratory testing. I mean, just because you can replace some automation with, some part of my brain with some automation Does not mean you can replace all of my brain with automation. That's crazy. Part of the joy of testing is saying, oh, I wonder what would happen if, and then I go and do something. That's part of the joy and beauty of testing. No one is going to replace that. No tool can possibly replace that. No automation can replace that. And I don't understand managers who think that. You know, in some ways, testing is a lot more creative than development. I don't understand managers who don't understand that. This is, just because I write a little bit less code doesn't mean that it's not more creative. And somebody tweet that, okay? I don't understand why people don't understand that, because I write a lot less code as a tester, but I'm a lot more devious. Boy, I just don't understand that. Managers who don't get, I just don't get that. Yeah, that's a good question, Dot.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. We have loads of questions coming in, so I hope I can get to most of them. We have one from Garrett here, and they are asking, now let me just get it up, how do you approach a project in which one part is done waterfall, some part is Scrum or Agile, and both are coming together in the integration phase? And Garrett says, wouldn't it be a very good practice for the testers to get into both parts, see the integration part, which will come later on?
So, can you say that again, Miriam?
I can. So
I got lost there. Sorry.
Sure. So how would you approach a project in which some of it is done in waterfall, some of it is also done in Scrum or Agile, and both are coming together in the integration phase?
Oh, water scrum fall. Okay, so I would try and get the testers involved in the requirements in the waterfall part. I would have the testers involved in the iterations, and then of course have the testers involved in the hardening sprints. This, I mean, I see this all the time, right? This is a typical way that a lot of people transition to Agile. This is actually not Agile. This is a very wonderful life cycle called incremental. It's an incremental life cycle, and it's called Sage Delivery. It's a great life cycle, and you should read about it in Manage It, Your Guide to Modern Pragmatic Project Management. I don't see why people aren't reading the other project management books that are out there. I think the key is to keep the requirements part as short as possible, because you're not going to get all the requirements right, and to move into short iterations as quickly as possible, and make sure that the testers are integrated into the iterations. Make sure you get to done, making sure that that what done means includes the testers. This is often the most difficult part, because the testers are not always accustomed to having to keep up with the developers, right? I had a conversation, an email conversation a few weeks ago with a tester who was so accustomed to writing manual scripts that he said, how do I keep up with the developers, right? I write manual scripts, and I can't execute them every single time. They write more code every iteration. And I said to him, well, you'll have to automate your manual scripts. And he said, I don't know how. So, right, so there's a huge issue here. It's really an issue, right? You cannot execute manual scripts and have all those manual scripts every iteration. So you have to do some you have to automate them, or you can't use them, or you have to do something different. Right, so you have to think about, remember at the beginning I said the bigger your problem, the more diverse your approaches have to be for testing. You have to think about, what do I need to do differently so that I test thoroughly and don't do possibly the same kind of testing I used to do, but I do equivalent kinds of testing so that I cover everything I want to do. And then for my ending testing, so that I actually finish testing everything at the end, what do I need to do then? I think it's really important to say, am I covering everything when I need to cover it, so that I am doing my risk-based testing when I need to?
Okay, Joanna, that's great. We'll take one more question, and the rest of them we will put into a post for the EuroSTAR blog. So we have one from Diana here, and she says, in our project, everything is changing so fast that work cannot be provided for the whole day. Would Agile help us?
The work cannot be provided for the whole day?
I think that's
Is
probably,
that what it says?
yes, I think it's probably lost in translation there. Maybe that work cannot be done for the whole day.
Or work cannot be provided for the whole week, maybe?
Maybe.
I think that Agile might be able to help, maybe. Usually you can figure out work for an entire week at a time, but it might be that there are other things going on. I don't know is the answer, because I would have to understand why things are happening so fast you couldn't plan for a day. Maybe because you should be able to plan for a day, never mind a week. So maybe I'm confused. I would expect you to be able to.
Sorry, Joanna, I think I have a clarification actually from another attendee, from Thomas. He thinks that she means the work scope is changing during the day.
Oh, that the work scope is changing during the day? No. If you can't manage to keep the work scope from changing during the day, then you need to have the discipline to not change at least during one day. I'm not sure that Agile can help you there. So Agile is about Agile invites change, but at some point you have to be able to not change for at least a day, because you need to get feedback on what you're doing. So if you change everything all the time, how can you make progress if everything changes all the time? I don't understand that. Right? The requirements need to stop changing long enough for you to be able to do something. Right? So they have to not change at least for a day so you can do something.
Okay, Joanna, that's great. Thank you very much. I think we'll have to leave it at there. So I'd just like to thank everybody who attended today, and thank you very much to Joanna, because I know it's quite early where you are at the moment. So before I let everyone go, I'd just like to remind you that on Thursday, after our very last webinar, we will have a live chat session open to all attendees, and of course some of the speakers will be there, where you can share your insights and opinions, and we will also have a competition for a free conference place. So anyone who attends the chat will be entered into that draw. So this webinar is now over. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for attending, everyone.